Welcome to Education for Life. This is a course called The Psychology of Dating, and we've termed it Original Spark, How to Do Relationships Well, because we think when somebody meets someone else, there's a spark that occurs. And what we're trying to do with this particular course is give you some of the practical psychological tools to give you the best chance to make that spark happen. And so we're drawing a lot of our information from someone called Dr. John Gottman, who's actually been researching, him and his wife have researched marriages for over 40 years. And one of the key things that he came out of his research is honouring your partner's dreams is the core to a healthy relationship. So right at this point in time in the course, we wanted to ask you, why are you doing this course? What's the motive behind this? Is it to meet somebody new? Is it to gain more skills around the dating concept? Is it to hear from a psychologist about what we've learned inside the therapy room when it comes to relationships? What are some of the reasons that you're doing this course? Because what I'd love you to do is even pause this recording and write down some of those reasons. Write down what are your goals for this particular course, and hopefully as we go through the presentation today, this free webinar, that you'll be able to even tick some of those boxes straight away through this particular course. So just getting into it, we also wanted to advise a risk warning that a lot of what we're talking about today is what we call psychoeducation. So it's education around psychology. It's impossible for us to take into account your personal specific needs through the internet. But what we're trying to do is give you the best information that we've learned in therapy. I've done over 10,000 hours of face-to-face therapy across the last 10 years. Plus, I've had many life experiences in other education settings as well. So just if you'd hit pause, have a read of the risk warning. Any questions that you have just email us on info@educationforlife.com.au. I'll be back with you in a second. So thanks for coming back. Hope that was all super clear. So with Original Spark, what we're actually going to talk about and the psychology of dating is an overview of the course. We're actually going to talk about the milestones of dating, which is really what the course is all about. That's part of the overview. And then today in the free webinar, we're actually going to talk about community. And as that's the first milestone that you need to sort of have a look at when it comes to dating. We're going to talk about a few practical activities and some homework and next steps as well with this particular webinar. Also, you'll be receiving in your email, probably in the next few days as well, an offer. And the offer changes regularly, so we're not going to specify it in the webinar. But what we'd like you to do is just notice that offer is probably time limited. So have a really good look at it, because the course itself runs a good 5 hours worth of content, and that offer will be time limited, just normally to a few days. So have a look at that too. Hope you really enjoy this webinar as well as when we get into it. So some of the milestones that we talk about with dating are really consistent across cultures, and they're consistent across time frames. So we're talking about thousands of years of people who have moved into long-term relationships have followed this pattern. So it's not a pattern that you might think is amazing initially, or think, wow, that's something new I've never heard of before, because I'm pretty sure most people listening to this webinar would be aware of this pattern. What I think I've found, especially in sessions, is people aren't aware of how to utilize this pattern to their best advantage. And so what we are doing here and presenting the psychology behind dating is to look at the standard pattern of dating, even anthropologically, how it happens within different cultures, but then using that pattern to the best of your advantage. So that way you're not manipulating other people. What you're doing is aligning your own life to the pattern of dating, which has been proven across the years for centuries. And so that's kind of what we're talking about with the milestone. So the first milestone is community, is that you need to find a community to meet other people with, and that community can vary. It can change depending on the day, the hour. There's that many different communities out there. Even on the internet, there are so many different communities. When it comes to online courses, there's a community called Udemy, which I only found out about earlier this year, and there's a community called Teachable, and there's all these different communities when it comes to online courses as well. Like there's a whole bunch of different areas that you can check out there. Now, once you find yourself in a community, the next step about dating is being noticed. So if you're in a community of, say, 20 people and you're all at a dinner party somewhere, at a restaurant in the city, and you're enjoying each other's company, and you happen to notice somebody across the room, well, you want to be noticed by that person. And so this is the second step of dating, is that what are some of the things that are noticeable about one another. And it's quite interesting, the science around this is it's not as simple as you might think, in the sense of some people notice certain things about other people. I remember clearly my mother telling me that one of the first things that she noticed about my father was that he cleaned the back of his shoes. and me and my brothers laugh at that sometimes, because that's sort of the way my father was, is that he was a very conscientious man. He would clean everything, he would leave no stone unturned, if that makes sense. And that was a symbol of his personality. So that's actually what my mum noticed about my dad. And so that's quite an interesting thing. And this is what the science talks about. The science talks a bit about, what do we notice in one another, and how we can sort of exemplify that. So when you're wanting to be noticed, if you've got a bit of a clue on that, then that gives you a bit of insight. Attraction is the next one. And this is quite a in-depth psychological topic, and attraction is going to take a lot of airtime up in the full course that we have here at Education for Life, because it is very individualized, in that what is attractive to one person may not be to the next, and attraction itself can vary so dramatically. And so if you've got a bit of an idea about what you're attracted to and why, that sort of gives you some good insight into creating sort of safe sort of family situations there. Then once you find yourself attracted to somebody, you notice somebody, you're in community with them, you've noticed them, you find yourself attracted to them, that you're finding that they're being attracted to you, you want to kind of test that. And so the testing of attraction is what we call flirting. So when you're flirting with somebody, you're actually sort of checking the waters. You're testing out whether the attraction that you feel towards someone's reciprocating. So whether someone's reciprocating that attraction. And flirting's kind of a bit like game playing, in that we're testing. You can be a bit of a scientist, if you like, where you're scientifically testing the waters. Remember, one of my clients used his community that he used was the online dating world, and he had a whole checklist where he would regularly go on dates out of his community, and he would actually, and one of his checklists was whether he could flirt with the person easily or not. And that was just a funny thing, which I remember someone having, and that was quite cool. Now, with flirting, the end result of flirting is sort of like declaration, where you get to a point where it's like you're declaring or showing your hand. You're kind of showing, look, I'm into you, I'm digging you. Some cultures we talk about having the talk with somebody, or chatting with someone about your feelings. And we're going to talk a bit about that too, because some of the ways that people approach that can be devastating to people, because they might be declaring too early, or they might be declaring in a situation that's not favourable towards them, and then rejection is a very real issue in that situation. So we're going to talk a bit about declaration and flirting sort of in one go there. And then the last one is we're going to talk about what is a healthy relationship. And this is a lot from Dr. John and Julie Gottman's research about what actually makes up a healthy relationship. And we're going to talk that through the course. So the whole course itself, the full course, goes through all the different milestones. Today in the free webinar, we're just going to go through community in a fair bit of detail, but we definitely want to set you up for a win with community as well. And if you're interested in those other areas, noticing attraction, all the other ones, we're going to go through a fair bit of detail in the full course, which again, will be going forwards in that full course offer. So with community, we're all born into a community. And if you think about it, whatever that community is, it's your community. So it can be a family community. Most of us are born into families. Some of us aren't. Some of us are born into situations where we might have been orphaned, or there might have been a situation, but that is still a community. So we actually have a community that we're born into. And for thousands of years, the origins of dating were also from that community. So often, matchmakers, parents arranging marriages or relationships, necessity, practicality, and procreation are all drivers behind matching people, who were in that community. And so when we think about community, sometimes we think we dislike our community. Sometimes we're not happy we're in the community that we're in, or the pickings of who we actually are attracted to or who we like are not within the community that we're in. And so this is where we want to actually open our minds a bit and to realize, hey, we're in a community, but that's not a static thing. That's not a solid thing. Sometimes people feel that they're dealt their community in life and that's who they're stuck with the rest of their life. Now that's true of family, but it's not necessarily true of the community that you're living in. So one of the first points that we want to point out with this particular course is that you have potential to change your community. You also have potential to architect a community or set a community up. And that's what we're going to talk about in this particular lesson today. And hopefully that can hold a bit of a thought already for you about where we're going. So there's a book by Aziz Ansari called Modern Romance. It's quite an interesting book. He's a comedian, so he's not actually necessarily a scientist, but a really interesting book. And he actually pointed out in this book, and this is the average age of first marriages in the United States, that as the years have gone on, we're marrying older and older. Sort of more mature, if that makes sense. So, in the sort of 50s and 60s, the average age might have been 20 to 24 that we were getting married. And then the 80s sort of hit, and then that increased to sort of going up to the 30s. I think in Sydney, Australia, actually, the average age of getting married is at 31. So it's quite an interesting thought. And Aziz talks about how he thinks that there's too much choice at the moment, and there's too many communities that people find themselves that they're getting more and more specific about what they want, and hence there's that fear of connection with people long term because they're not going to suit our long term needs. And he made this kind of thought, which I think is interesting, is that in those 50s and 60s we didn't have really a global community where you could fly across the planet to meet somebody. Most of the people that you got married to were within about a 20-mile radius of where you grew up, which I think is interesting. So there's a demographic thing, which I think is interesting there too. So a couple of those thoughts around that. I mean, as a psychologist, I tend to think sometimes people fundamentally are afraid of rejection. So there's a fear of rejection, which is absolutely critical or core to the dating relationship. And so people are afraid to step out to connect with someone new because they're afraid of being rejected. So, and what I think, and this is where we're going with community, is that if you can find a community to support you while you're in the dating space, then that fear of rejection can be lessened dramatically. So instead of trying to approach the dating space as a sole, tiger or sole sort of someone who's out to seek that one person, the stakes are really high. So the stakes are extremely high when you're one-on-one asking someone out. Whereas when you are developing a community of friends, of colleagues, of mentors, of people that you can connect with regularly, then that actually lessens the stakes around rejection dramatically. And so that's kind of one of the first steps that we're going to talk about with dating. So some of the common communities that we talk about when it comes to dating is, in the communities that we find ourselves. First of all, it can be like a gym or a physical kind of activity outlet. And there's often places that we can meet people. You can meet people at like a church community or a religious community. So people that you've been hanging out with, in a weekend space in a church or a religious setting. People in your workplace, often a workplace romance where you connect with somebody at work who's attractive, that you find interesting and you're regularly sort of connecting with. There's volunteering communities. So in Australia we have lifesavers, which are basically people that patrol our surf beaches and they can look after people, if they're swimming, and also what we call SES or fire brigade. So they're all specialists communities for volunteering. Often a community can be family arranged, so a family might arrange a community for you to connect and find a partner in as well. There's also what we call an online community or an eHarmony community. A Tinder, Plenty of Fish is another one, a really big one actually. It's a free online community, and RSVP, etc. Some of the different communities there as well. So what we want to just sort of point out here, and I'm just going to use a few of my fantastic art skills here. I hope it's okay. I'll just make this a little bit bigger. Is that when we're talking about community, and you can even do a bit of a mind map like this, is that particular space is where you're going to draw your potential partners from. And you're not going to get them from the air. They're not necessarily going to drop from a stalk. You have to basically find them within a community setting. So growing up, some of those settings can be sort of family connections, family friends. And like we said, it could be like a church setting where you're in a religious group, or a family setting like that. It could be like a gym or a sporting club that you find someone potentially. Like we said, there's like work as well. And so what I'd like you to do is, even if you pause this webinar now, you can actually sit down and do a bit of a mind map of what communities do you connect with, and what communities do you find it easy to connect with, and what communities do you find some good friendships within. So again, as I'm going through this as well, volunteering is another community. And then there's also the online community, which we talk a little bit about in the full course as well. But with the online community, there's things like Tinder, which is very popular at the moment, and actually quite popular for long-term relationships too, which is quite interesting. Not always for long-term relationships. There's something called eHarmony, which is a pretty big one. There's quite a few around, but there's another one called Plenty of Fish, which I think is the biggest free one on the planet at the moment as well. So with online communities, the research talks about how for the initial stages of connecting with someone, online communities are fantastic. So you're able to see literally thousands of, hundreds of thousands of potential partners at the flick of your finger. And basically with that online community though, it can take away a whole amount of guesswork about someone's background, someone's likes, their interests. Some research I remember reading around, I think it was eHarmony, and they'd done a TED talk about how the people who had actually had long-term relationships through eHarmony, what were some common factors that they found. And the only common factor that they found was that they'd written more inside their profiles. So they'd actually found, and when they'd written and conversed with other people inside eHarmony, they'd actually written longer sentences. And so it was fascinating to hear that, because the conclusion they came to, which I think was spot on, was that that people who wrote bigger profiles and bigger sentences were actually facing the fear of rejection and putting themselves out there. Is that they weren't afraid to go far and actually go a little bit more into detail about who they are and what they're about, and they also were aware that they were going to actually potentially be rejected. But the whole point around that is that what they're looking at is being vulnerable. And this is sort of really at the core of the psychology behind dating, is how vulnerable are you? How vulnerable are you with someone that you're keen to date? How vulnerable are you? And what are some of the safeguards to help you in that vulnerable state? And this is where we wanted to position the last part of this sort of free webinar, this free course, is what we wanted to encourage you to do is to start building a group, and I call it like a posse, as in a group of people in a Western movie, because my dad used to like Western movies, is what sort of group can you form that actually is its own community, that you can actually deliberately almost target people that you want to date. And so I'll give you an example in that when I was many years ago when I was looking to date my wife, a friend of mine and myself, we got together a group of young guys, but we also deliberately invited the cutest, best looking girls that we could to regularly go out with us every weekend. And again, this is many years ago now, but we specifically architected, and this is I'm just using myself as an example of how you can do this, is that when you're deliberately architecting a group, what you're actually doing is you're being a bit of a fire starter. So not literally, but what you're doing is you're wanting to start that original spark going off. And the way you're doing that is you're creating or architecting a group of people to go and do things regularly. And so in Sydney, Australia, for example, there was many different areas that we did, had lots of great times across a couple of years actually in this period of my life. And the whole reason we did that, and this is the main point I'm trying to make, and it's not about me at all. So sorry didn't mean to highlight myself in that at all. But what I'm wanting to point out is that vulnerability becomes a lot better, a lot easier when you're in a group of people that you can trust. Okay? And so when you're in a group of people of say, 5 to 10 to 20 people that you can trust, and you're regularly going out to social events, you're having lots of fun, you're going to the beach, and I remember going to cricket games and the beach, and there's all these different things that we did. But what you're doing is you're actually creating a space where you're able to be vulnerable, number one. You're also fully aware that you're interested in somebody else, but at the same time, you're actually, you're in a safer environment, if that makes sense. So it's sort of a little bit counterintuitive to what you think a traditional dating scenario is, that it's asking one person out on a date and really quizzing them about their life. Of course that does happen, but what I'm trying to say in this psychology kind of methodology is that if you can lower the stakes of being vulnerable, there's less chance that you'll actually be rejected. And that's really what draws people away from that traditional dating model, is that often people find themselves rejected regularly, and then that's actually what turns them off dating. And this is why sometimes people have been months, if not years, without going on a date, and they feel sad about themselves. They feel sad that there's something wrong with them. And the reality is there's absolutely nothing wrong with them whatsoever. And they're fantastic. They're amazing. They just haven't connected the dots when it comes to community. And this is why we want to just jumpstart the whole thought straight away with this free webinar, is that if you can architect a community or find a community, and then be a bit of a fire starter, be a bit of somebody who is a bit of a go-getter when you're creating events to go to, it's amazing who'll be drawn to that. Because a lot of people, especially on the weekends, they're not doing too much. And if you're doing a lot, great, you may not need any of this information. But what we're wanting to do is encourage you to be specific about it and literally architect exactly the people that you're wanting to come along, and really enjoy yourselves in that. Bit of a funny one. Online dating is a lot of fun until I have to go on a date, and it's so classic for online dating. And so some of the activities that we talked about is groups of 10 to 20 people is just really encourage you with that. And this is actually what the research talks about as well. And really what you're looking to do is just create activities around a cafe or a lunch, going to see a movie, going to the beach, going on bushwalks and the mall, hanging out with someone's pool, having a barbecue. In Sydney, Australia, we have amazing New Year's Eve fireworks. Incredible. And I still remember about 3 years in a row, a big group of us, probably about 60 of us, all went to the same place. It was like a headland that we overlooked the city, and it was just such a wonderful time that we had as a big group of friends. And literally that's where I met my wife, was in that group of friends. And it was just an amazing time. And really what we're after is that safety and security component, is that, there are some horror stories when it comes to Tinder, and I'm sure in different places of the world, you might have heard those as well. And what we're trying to highlight is, with that safety and security component, is that when you're in a group of people, there's relative safety in that group. And even if you enjoy a drink or two or whatever it is, you're still within that safety space where you're finding, that potential partner in that safety space. So really, just lastly, just wanting to point out just sort of a little bit of homework and some next steps is just specific. Find 3 wingmen or wingwomen that can be kind of your partners in crime. And so I'm saying that metaphorically, that if you have 3 people that you could find, that if, say you got 3 mates who are keen to date as well, and get 3 of those mates, and then actually start architecting what your next steps might be. Okay, so the first step is find 3 wingmen, 3 wingwomen, and then the next step is to work out a list in the next, say, month or 2 of all the different events in your city or your community that you could go and actually invite 3 other girls or 3 other guys and go and enjoy those events together. And you might think, well, that's going to be really difficult. It is difficult for some, but it's actually that is a lot lower risk than asking someone one-on-one out. And you might think, well, I want to ask someone one-on-one out. Go for it. This is not at all to pull away from that or to stop you from that. It's just actually to try and lower the risk of rejection, where you're just hanging out with the opposite sex or with the same, whoever you like, and you're actually enjoying that as well. So another thing I've put as homework or some next steps is find 3 mentors. So parents, older generation, and you're looking for successful relationships. And the reason why I put this in is often the research talks about people that sort of really find themselves in rejection situations haven't had much counsel around what they're doing. And so if you can connect with some people who do relationships well and just ask their advice around what's going on. And so just lastly, just want to point out, being a fire starter, meet someone to start generating activities with. And just through this webinar, I'd love to hear back from you. If there's one thing that you've learned, I'd love you to just email it back to us here at info@educationforlife.com.au. Again, this is the first step in the dating world, is finding a community that you'll be able to find a partner within. And so hopefully this has helped a bit, just a little bit of an interesting thought, hopefully to lower some of the stakes when it comes to those initial steps in dating somebody. Hope you really enjoyed this webinar. The full course, like I said, is on offer, which will go through in huge amount of detail, all the other steps, and it'll go through a lot more detail with community as well. And I really appreciate your time and your listening as well. Thank you.